Okay, so here we go. Second section, chapter 5, pages 157 and 167. So this unit is from 1765 to 1770. All right. So in 1765, we're going to get a Stamp Act Congress. So in Virginia, Patrick Henry and some others, they're going to publicly condemn Grenville, who remembers the Prime Minister, and George III, who is currently the King. 9 assemblies are going to send delegates to the Stamp Act Congress, so 9 of the colonies, which meets in New York City in October of 1765. They're going to protest the loss of rights and liberties. They're going to declare that the only representatives elected by colonists could tax the people. So that is their biggest complaint. It's not necessarily taxes. I mean, everybody understands they have to pay taxes, but it's a matter of how they're being taxed, what they're being taxed on, that kind of stuff. The petition for the repeal of the Stamp Act, some members are going to start boycotting British goods, so they'll stop buying them. After the Stamp Act goes into effect on November 1st, 1765, mobs are going to start to demand the stamp tax collectors resign. In Boston, you have the Sons of Liberty, run by people like John Adams and John Hancock. They are going to burn a tax collector in effigy. This right here is what we're talking about in this little illustration. So when you burn something in effigy, that means you make a representation of, so this is a representation of the tax collector. So think of like a voodoo doll, for instance, and then they will set this on fire. So we're not actually going to set fire to the tax collector, but like a representation of the tax collector. So that's what we mean by burning an effigy. They will also later destroy the home of the tax collector, Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. They are encouraged by wealthy merchants and patriot lawyers, so like I said, John Hancock, John Adams. Mobs of middling artisans and minor merchants are going to protest British policies by destroying property and intimidating royal officials. These actions are going to spread beyond port cities to nearly every colony. So it'll start in Boston and places like that, the port cities, but it will start to spread, these actions of boycotting and whatnot. Mob actions, they have a lot of meaning among the English, but the goals of the crowds in the colonies were new. Some of them obviously have political motives. Others are going to just go because it's something exciting to do. The protest is going to work in most of the colonies. The collectors are going to give up their positions as a result of public pressure. If you don't have anybody collecting the taxes, you don't have people paying the taxes either. All right. Okay, so this is what we looked at the other day. Our intellectual traditions. This right here in the middle is our friend John Locke, Life, Liberty, and Property. Patriot writers are going to draw on this English common law. Enlightenment rationalism, which stresses the idea of natural rights and separation of powers. And the Republican and the Whig strands of English political tradition, which comes from the British constitutional monarchy. And they're going to oppose arbitrary taxes, which is what they feel these taxes are. They feel like they are arbitrary, unnecessary taxes that are unfairly being levied on them. Building on arguments that equate the colonists with slaves, and that is one thing that they had a lot of arguments with when they were actually writing the Declaration much later, is they're going to consider themselves slaves to the British government. But when you're actually holding slaves, real slaves, that's going to be a problem. So people like Benjamin Franklin and James Otis are going to start to critique the Institute of Slavery as a violation of slaves' natural rights. So you can't claim the British government's not giving you your natural rights when you are holding people and not giving them theirs. Massachusetts African Americans submitted at least 4 petitions to the legislature asking for the abolition of slavery based on their natural rights. At that time, that will not be successful. Slaves in Virginia hoped to win their freedom by supporting British troops that they expected to soon arrive in the colony. James Madison and other slave owners worked to suppress connections between revolutionary ideology and slavery. So they'll stop calling them slaves to the British government because that is going to be a problem. All right. Let's see. Charles Townshend is going to step in. He's going to hold the position as Chancellor of the Executor. Basically, he's head of the Treasury. Under Prime Minister William Pitt. Who's that lovely man on the right. The Townshend Acts, named after Charles Townshend, of 1767 imposed duties on colonial imports, so taxes on these imports of paper, paint, glass, tea, that were expected to raise about 40,000 pounds a year. Some of this money was allocated for the cost of military in America. Most of it's really earmarked for the salaries of royals, governors, judges, and other imperial officials, which would make them loyal to the crown. So they're now raising money out of the colonies to pay for all these extra people. It was followed by other acts that forced the will of Parliament on the colonists and punished them for non-compliance. Obviously, people are not going to like this. You're going to have another boycott, colonial leaders focusing on the intent of the acts. February of 1768, the Massachusetts Assembly is going to condemn the Townshend Acts. And Boston and New York are going to boycott British goods. Women start to become very important as far as producing homespun cloth, which allows the boycott to continue. Daughters of Liberty, and Abigail Adams was one of them, her husband John Adams being part of the Sons of Liberty. Let's see. They produced homespun textiles. They drank coffee, not tea, as acts of patriotism, because your tea is coming from Britain. Colonists who were not previously politically active felt compelled to participate in the boycott as it spread across Massachusetts and New York. So I will often say that it takes the everyday person to make change. So you can have a couple of loudmouth people saying things need to change, but until the everyday person gets up and starts doing things to cause change, you don't get change. And we'll see that evident later during the Civil Rights Movement especially. Let's see. Because they're upset with all this opposition that's occurring, General Thomas Gage is going to send 2,000 troops to Boston because they are not happy with what's going on. You're going to have some problems in the West. Like I said, Proclamation Line of 1763, basically saying that people can't move west of that. Ohio Indians are going to organize to prevent further colonial expansion. British officials in 1768 want to make this temporary proclamation line permanent. Clearly that doesn't go through because, well, we're all here today. So, all right. So later in 1770, you're going to have some conflicts between the colonists and the British troops. You have a lot of colonists that are out of work. You have a lot of British troops just hanging around Boston. And they're going to go to this area in March of 1770. And basically they're going to taunt a sentry, which is like a guard. And he's going to call for help, and you're going to end up with the British soldiers there. Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to start firing, and once one person starts firing, then other people will start firing into the crowd of protesters. They will eventually kill 5 American colonists, and they will injure, I think, 8. Most of the colonists are going to remain loyal to the empire, but the 5 years of conflict had taken their toll, and we're talking from 1965 to 1770. Many leaders believe the British wanted to exploit the colonies for their own gain. They probably did. Benjamin Franklin suggested the colonies were now distinct and separate states with the same head or sovereign, the king. So we are still, even in 1770, after all this poor treatment that we feel like we're getting from the British government, all these extra taxes and things like that, we are still not asking for independence. We want to be treated as equal citizens of Great Britain. We want to be treated in the same manner in which they are treated in Great Britain. So just keep that in mind as we move forward through this chapter. So after the Boston Massacre, this is done by Paul Revere. It's an engraving called the Boston Massacre. Probably one of the most popular images of the time period. You can see the colonists are viewed as the victims, as the British kind of just randomly shoot at them. So, and you see how close they are. That is not like far away. All right. You got bleeding over there of the colonists. I mean, it's a pretty graphic picture of the Boston Massacre. Swords raid, all that kind of stuff. So this is a very popular image of the time. And I just want to show you this summer I got a chance to go to the State House. And this is an original engraving by Paul Revere. And it was owned by the Caldwell family. it was given to them by Paul Revere. They knew him, and they gave him this. So this is housed at the State Department in Washington, D.C. And if you see that picture on the bottom right, the name is underlined where it says Jam S. Caldwell. That's who owned this engraving. So given to them by Paul Revere. So I thought that was pretty cool. Thought you might want to see that. And if you don't, well, too bad for you. You saw it anyway. All right, this is just so you have an idea. The imports from Britain is going to be the blue, and you can see they drop at the Tea Act and all that kind of stuff, and they're going to start to drop off. Exports to Britain much lower than the imports, and you can also see where the boycott periods are and how those the sales or the imports drop quite drastically. So, all right, that gets us through the middle of the chapter. We've got one more section left, so hang with me. Start the next video. Wait till tomorrow, whatever makes your little self happy, and I will talk to you soon. So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happen to be listening to this, and I will see or speak to you soon. Bye.